All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, the Utah Jazz are clearly in rebuild mode, which was evident by their recent trade of All Star center Rudy Gobert to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And whereas that there was a time that the Jazz were unwilling to listen to offers on all-star guard Donovan Mitchell, that is no longer the case. The Jazz are currently listening to offers on Mitchell, and with that said, I highly doubt that he'll still be a member of this team once training camp starts. Now you have a new front office regime running things for the Utah Jazz, and you think about Danny Ainge coming in, and of course, like I said before, Danny Ainge is not attached at the hip with any of these players that he inherited. And, I think that was part of the reason why Gobert was traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I think another part of that is, do you want to be an inexpensive, mediocre team or an expensive, mediocre team? And you think about the contracts of both Mitchell and Gobert. And I say that because if you look at the Jazz, they have or they had what it took to be a playoff team and a playoff contender. But getting to the playoffs and advancing and making a championship run are different things. And to me, Utah had a ceiling of the second round. So, with that said, if you're not going to go any further, you might as well try again and start over and do something else. And, so far, for the Jazz, they acquired a lot of players, some young players, as well as picks in the Gobert move. And I think, Utah is looking for more picks right here when they potentially ship Mitchell out of town. And with that said, they want to come out of this smelling like a rose. And you think about what Danny Ainge was able to do many years ago when he suckered the Brooklyn Nets to take on a washed up Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. So let's see what happens, when he's able to trade a guy like Donovan Mitchell. Now, so far, the New York Knicks, publicly at least, are the most interested team in acquiring Mitchell, and there is mutual interest. Mitchell once, he's flirted with the idea of playing for the Knicks. He's from the New York area, and typically, you want to come back home. So let's see what happens there. But also, there's $1 million question: will other teams emerge to acquire Mitchell? And the thing is, yeah, publicly the Knicks are talking about this, and publicly we're hearing stories about the Knicks. But with that said, there's always a couple of teams that are working behind the scenes very quietly, and they could come in through the back door and, make a deal happen. Because at the end of the day, yeah, Mitchell maybe wants to go to the Knicks, but obviously the Jazz are going to do what's best for the Utah Jazz. So that could be Mitchell going someplace else. We'll just have to wait and see. The Jazz want picks as they're shedding salary, which is obvious. I think, obviously Utah will take a step or two back short term, but I think long term, they're going to be able to focus and get what they want going forward. Now, will Mitchell end up in New York City? I'm not sure. A lot of things have to factor in. You're hearing the name of RJ Barrett thrown around. Obviously, the Utah Jazz want picks as well. So, would the New York Knicks be willing to pull the trigger on something like that to get Mitchell? We'll have to wait and see. At the end of the day, for the Jazz, this is the harsh reality of them being in Salt Lake City. And this is no disrespect to anybody there, no disrespect to anybody in the state of Utah, because I think it's a tremendous place. But it's just so difficult to lure free agents there and also keep players, star players there long term. And I think for the Jazz organization, they had two of the greats that love playing there in John Stockton and Karl Malone. And it looked like they were going to get another dose of that. Maybe not as great, obviously, in Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer, and then that went awry. And now we've seen Gobert get traded. Mitchell more than likely is going to be traded as well. It's just so difficult to keep the star players in that place. And again, Salt Lake City is a very beautiful place. I've been there before. Utah as a whole is a wonderful place, but it's just so difficult to keep NBA players there long term, especially in this era. So what happens? I think sooner rather than later, Mitchell does get traded. It's a scenario where obviously the Kevin Durant trade rumors and the Kyrie Irving trade rumors are going to dominate the headlines for this summer and the NBA until they ultimately happen, which I do believe they will. But with that said, with what goes on or what potentially will go on with Donovan Mitchell and the Utah Jazz, that is definitely something to look at as well. Who's going to emerge? More than likely, I would imagine the Jazz are going to trade Mitchell to the Eastern Conference. I don't see them keeping him in the West. So let's see what team feels like, you know what, Donovan Mitchell gets us over the hump as far as being a championship contender. We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, like I talked about it before, and not just here, but in different podcasts previous to this, the Jazz are scaling back. They're headed in a different direction. They're going to look very different next season. And of course, with that said, Mitchell will have to get accustomed to wearing a different uniform next year. So let's see what happens with Mitchell, the Utah Jazz, and whichever team emerges with the best deal for the Jazz to acquire the All-Star guard. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take the time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, saying take care and have a good night. And just quickly, before I do sign off, I want to take this time to thank a new subscriber, Jack Black Male. Thank you so much for the subscription. Appreciate the support. Always feel free to check it out, drop comments, and I definitely appreciate the love. Once again, William Martin signing off, saying take care, folks. Have a good night. And thanks for once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube.